Welcome to World at Work TV. I'm Rose Stanley, and I'm joined today by Tony Castelbuono and Ryan Howard from the Whirlpool Corporation. Today we're going to be talking about performance management. So Ryan, let's start with you. How did you guys get started, and what were the factors behind the Whirlpool's decision to change your performance management factors?
Well, let me start by saying that Whirlpool has a very well-defined performance management program, and we have for years. In fact, the current process we have has been in place since 2006. Over the last couple of years, though, we began to look more closely at our performance management process, what we were doing well, what was being received well by employees, and what wasn't being received well. We have a pretty straightforward approach, a three-step process. Number one, align goals throughout the organization. Number two, to provide feedback and regular conversation around those goals. And then finally, step three is to evaluate progress against those goals. There was way too much energy, way too much emphasis being put on that third step around calibrations and around ratings, instead of the first two steps where most of the value is, where most all of the value is when you think about a performance management program. We, again, a couple years back, decided to put some more focus on processes to better align goals throughout the organization, from the top all the way to the lower parts. And then we also spent a lot of time producing coaching and development resources for leaders and employees, and emphasized the need to have conversations throughout the year, not just at a point in time during mid-year, but throughout the year, more real-time feedback, coaching that would help their employees. That's what started us in the direction of refreshing our performance management program, or what we call Extraordinary Performance and Results at Whirlpool, or EP&R for short. And what we've seen is some great feedback from the changes we've made. And one of the vehicles that we used to make those changes, to drive those changes throughout our Whirlpool culture, was the Manager Minute. And Tony can talk more about the design of the Manager Minute and the success of that program, but that was instrumental here over the past year to help drive a lot of these changes.
Looking at what we did and getting to the point where we rolled out the Manager Minute, there's two key areas that we looked at from a quantitative perspective in terms of how we measured the success of our EP&R, or our performance management process. One is through our annual engagement survey, and the other is through our annual EP&R Pulse survey. Two of the things that stood out was that there was an opportunity around how we were sharing and collaborating with leaders on how they educated employees on how their performance rating was determined. There was a gap there. From a U.S. perspective, and we look at it globally as well, from a U.S. perspective, one of the questions was, do I feel like I'm appropriately rewarded for my performance? And looking at the scores prior to launching some of this material, only 61% of employees said they agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. One of the other questions was, do I get feedback from my manager? And that one was even less in terms of how strongly employees agreed or strongly agreed. And that was with our engagement surveys. The other one was around our pulse surveys. And one of the questions was, do I feel like I understand how my performance rating is determined at the end of the year? And looking at that from a global perspective, only 60% of employees said they agreed or strongly agreed. So we saw also through the feedback from employees and comments from the engagement surveys, but also looking at it from a score perspective, that we had an opportunity.
So then, Tony, tell us a little bit about the concept of this thing that you guys are calling the Manager Minute.
It really centered around building stronger manager capabilities. And the question was, what were we going to do? And how were we going to do that? Were we going to launch new material, videos? What was that going to look like? And there were key themes. Employees wanted feedback. They wanted to know how their performance rating was going to be determined. And they wanted to, if they're working hard, they want to be recognized for that. So there were a number of key themes that we took into and said, well, how are we going to connect back to the people leaders so they can engage their teams to deliver extraordinary results? And what the Manager Minute was it It was a set of videos in blogs that we posted once a month starting from May through November in 2013. And there were 5 objectives. One, we wanted to provide relevant and key advice so that we can engage leaders in that crucial second phase of our annual EP&R cycle, which was develop and deliver. We wanted to provide an opportunity to recognize great leaders within the organization that have done this before. They could share their success stories of what they've done and help inspire others to deliver extraordinary results with their teams. We also wanted to create a personal connection with our senior leaders in the organization who were very much behind what we were doing and our performance management system. And we interviewed a number of senior leaders from our CEO to our senior vice president of HR and a number of other leaders at Whirlpool to share their story of what they've done and to provide those key tips that we could take into the video as well as incorporate into the blog and other learning material that was part of the Manager Minute. The last thing was we wanted to inspire people to become great people leaders. Because at the end of the day, if we could do that and help move the needle where leaders are better educated and engaged in the annual EP&R cycle, they would then be able to translate, hopefully, to educate their teams and coach and develop them throughout the year to help their teams be successful. It was done as a pilot for the US. We realized that we had done a lot of work around leveraging what we had with our performance management system and kind of a refresh in what we did with the criteria, the phases. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to change the game in terms of how people felt and thought about performance management and really provide tools in a succinct, timely manner that was relevant to people leaders. We rolled it out from our senior vice president would send a communication with an email, click this to go to the blog, to read it in a few minutes and watch the video. And it was a way where leaders could all engage in discussion forums, look at key advice and feedback, and at the end, for leaders who may want to, there was an opportunity to go to Whirlpool University to engage in further learning. And at the end of each blog, we would have self-check questions where employees could look and kind of self-reflect on how they were leading people or how they were leading themselves in their career at Whirlpool.
And I would just add to that, the Manager Minute did a great job through the interviews with leadership, did a great job of answering some tough questions. And the questions that were asked of these leaders were not cookie cutter questions. They were the same questions that employees had been asking, and the feedback that we have been receiving from employees in the engagement survey and other feedback tools. Some of the questions were very frank. You know, tell us about some of your most difficult times as a people leader. Tell us about mistakes you've made as a people leader. And our senior leadership answered those very frankly, and I think our employee population responded well to that.
So Tony, you had said earlier that employees had been asking for this. Now that it's in place, how has it been received?
Some of the feedback that we got from employees, whether they were just talking to us or sharing it as they posted comments on the blog or in the discussion forum, was they really very much appreciate it. And it took some time. When we initially launched it, we didn't have as many people going there as we may have had hoped for. We launched it to about 1,100 people leaders in 2013 in our first Manager Minute video, and we had just over 550 views. At the end of the year, we had nearly 2,200 views. That's the number of people that were going to check it out. You may ask, well, I wonder how long people were spending there. In looking at the people leaders in the US, or people leaders in general, 82% of people leaders that went to the website were watching the entire video. They were spending about 4.5 minutes per video, and the videos range from 4 to 5 minutes each month. One of the other things we looked at from an impact perspective was this really moving the needle where leaders were then taking this key advice and acting on it? You can provide video that's relevant, but do people leaders take that and start to practice it in their day-to-day lives as leaders? 73% of people leaders who were answering this survey said, yes, we are using this key tips and we're applying that in our day-to-day lives. And we could know from that, as well as the other quantitative and qualitative feedback that we got, that it wasn't just changing the way people were thinking, people were starting to act differently.
Another indication of how it was received was the realization that we had kind of come across almost by accident, a well-branded communication vehicle for the organization, specific for managers. Whether it's in performance management or some other areas within HR, outside of HR, where our organization's trying to build manager capability. And what we found was that the manager minute was very well received, and we had created this communication vehicle that we could use for other things ongoing, not just to drive performance management next year or into the future, but also to drive other leadership type of competencies, other competencies that we want to see in our managers. We now have a vehicle to be able to drive that through the organization ongoing.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Tony, for sharing your performance management system with us. For World at Work TV, I'm Rose Stanley.